Is the press killing American military people? That's the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Speaking last week to journalists in Washington, retired General Ricardo Sanchez, former commander in Iraq, hammered the Bush administration for its poor war planning, and then issued a shocking accusation against the press.
What is clear to me is that you're perpetuating the corrosive partisan politics that is destroying our country and killing our service members who are at war. For some of you, just like some of our politicians, the truth is of little to no value if it does not fit your own preconceived notions, biases, or agendas.
Wow. Now, the general, I believe, is talking about liberal media outlets like the New York Times and NBC News, both of which trumpeted the general's criticism of the Bush war plan, but ignored his media attack. Now, last Friday on the Brian Williams broadcast, NBC News spent about 25% of the entire program on Al Gore's Nobel Peace Prize, and then did another story on Sanchez's negative assessment of the war. The New York Times also gave the Sanchez war view and Mr. Gore extensive coverage, but completely ignored Medal of Honor winner Navy SEAL Michael Murphy, who was killed in Afghanistan. Now, since Lieutenant Murphy lived on Long Island in the Times' coverage area, it is simply hard to believe the paper would not mention this incredible honor. Also, the Times initially reported on murder accusations against 2 Green Berets in Afghanistan, but ignored the conclusion of the story as the men were acquitted of any wrongdoing. Come on, this is bull. Now, we asked Times editor Bill Keller for a comment. As usual, he wouldn't appear, but a spokesperson said the paper will mention Lieutenant Murphy later. Great. In yesterday's Washington Post, an article that documents the improvement in Iraq ran on page 1. In that article, statistics were printed that show a dramatic downturn in American military casualties and big losses for al-Qaeda in Iraq. It is very possible that Iraq is turning around for the USA, but will the left-wing media report that? Who knows? What Talking Points does know is that hatred of the Bush administration has skewed much of the reporting on Iraq and Afghanistan, and the American people no longer are getting honest reporting from some news agencies. Any improvement in Iraq, of course, helps the Republicans, and that is anathema to the left. General Sanchez was right on both counts. The Bush administration relied far too heavily on Iraqi cooperation, and when it didn't come, there was no plan B. And at this point in history, the U.S. media is full of corrupt ideologues who put their worldview above honest information. This is not only putting our military in danger, ladies and gentlemen, it puts all of us in danger. Off the top story tonight, Fox News analyst and Newsday columnist Ellis Hennigan did write about Lieutenant Murphy receiving the Medal of Honor. He joins us now. We had a nice piece in Newsday, and Newsday, a very liberal paper, also covered the event of the awarding of the Medal of Honor to Lieutenant Murphy. His family were there.
Thank you. I mean, you're lucky to have me here, because I report the good stuff when it happens, and when tough stuff needs to be reported, I do that too. And I appreciate your mentioning it.
And that's why you're on a program,
Thank you,
Ellis, because you're an honest guy. We don't care whether you're liberal or not. But the New York Times ignored the story. The New York Post killed them for doing it. There is no excuse for not mentioning Lieutenant Murphy and the Medal of Honor. Yet they do not do it. Why not?
They missed a great story. I mean, the reason you want to ascribe it to some kind of left-wing political theory, I'll tell you, has a whole lot more to do with the New York Times doing a rotten job covering its own hometown. I've competed against them in New York for years. They're lazy, they're slow, they're a day late and a dollar short when it comes to covering New York.
All right. Then they did the story about the Afghan snipers, as we did.
Yeah.
And the Times and us
Important story.
were the only ones who did it nationally. And then when they were acquitted, they didn't follow up. Now that is against journalism 101. If you do the initial story, then you bring the conclusion to your readers. They did not do it. So that's 2 in a row, Ellis. Now, maybe you can excuse the laziness on Lieutenant Murphy. Okay. You can't excuse.
No, you got to. If you cover an allegation, you got to cover the way it was.
So why didn't they do it? I
don't.
You don't know.
So no.
You know. Could it be possible? Hold it.
Admit this.
Could it possibly be?
It could. It could. But let's agree. Neither one of us knows why.
Well, Lieutenant Sanchez, he's been watching that news coverage for a long time, and he says it's flat out corrupt.
Well, let me tell you something about General Sanchez. I thought his comments were interesting, but you know what? I think he's a lot more of an expert on military matters than he is on media matters. Like, I actually know something about fighting wars. He said, this is a nightmare. He says, we may never get out of there. His press criticism is frankly a little amateurish and clumsy.
I don't believe that for a second. The general has a point of view. It's a strong point of view. He sees the coverage in Iraq.
Yeah.
We've just given you two examples of the New York Times booting obvious stories. I mean, I can give you 50.
Well, let me tell you
I can give you 50.
Let me say one thing that's interesting. Did you notice the general didn't name any news organizations?
No, he
nor
didn't.
did he say left or right. You jumped immediately to the conclusion that he was
think he's talking about conservative news agencies?
You know what? You know what? There is misunderstanding about this war in this country on left and right. Your friends spent the last 4 years saying everything was going wonderful.
I don't have any friends.
The war is a hero. Oh, it's gone so great over there. Turns out, guys like me were a lot righter about what was going on in Iraq because we were more skeptical.
It's not a matter of right.
That's true.
It's not a matter of being right and wrong. I was wrong on two key components of Iraq.
Right. And I was right on those.
But my coverage has been fair.
I was right on those, incidentally.
Well, Ellis, anybody get lucky, you know? You're a pinhead and you're usually wrong, so you got lucky.
Well, I'm glad you admit
it,
sir.
I admit you're a pinhead.
No, that's not
Now, hold it. Our coverage here has been fair. It has been fair down the line. We cover major stories.
Okay.
We covered Lieutenant Murphy on Friday.
Right.
We mentioned he got the Medal of Honor. The New York Times didn't for political reasons. Look,
now,
if you hold it. If Sanchez makes two provocative statements in a speech, which he did, no war plan and the press is corrupt, and then you see NBC News and the New York Times picking out the anti-war comment, but not the anti-press comment, look, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to deduce what's going on here, Ellis.
Well, listen, I have no problem arguing either one of them with you, but let's understand what is the reality here. Everyone comes to these stories, including you, Bill O'Reilly. Thankfully, history reveals this with preconceptions about it. You were ready to like the war. And so,
liking the war. I wanted to win the war.
My friend, you were slow in recognizing the reality there. At the same time, others on the other side of the political spectrum are slow to recognize realities that go against their preconceptions.
What's the reality there now?
The reality
what is
that the surge has reduced the violence, but that it hasn't done squat for the political realities in the country, and we got no idea when we're getting out of there, and it's going to be a big mess no matter what happens.
So you see that things militarily are getting better in Iraq?
There are fewer people being killed this month than 3 months ago, and that is great news.
They say Al-Qaeda is on a verge of defeat.
Both are things worth celebrating, but don't be so blinded by the cheer that you don't see the tough stuff.
I told you that our reporting has been straight down the line. It's been fair, but I'll tell you this.
Okay.
I give the Washington Post credit for running on page one.
Good story.
You would have never seen it on NBC News, and you'd never see it in the New York Times because they're ideologically based, Ellis. I'll give you the last word. God help me.
And if I have the ability to do the great hero story when it's warranted, as it was in the wonderful case of Lieutenant Murphy.
Which the New York Times didn't do.
Well, you know what? And I did a better job than they did.
Okay, but they didn't do it.
But I ask you to join me
I'm not
in
joining you for
remaining
anything.
Skeptical when the facts warrant that.
Skeptical is good.
Some of your friends are slow to do that.
All right.
Good to
I don't
see
have
you.
any friends.
Good to see you.
Okay.
I'm still your friend.
All right. Lean back. Ellis Hannigan, everybody.